Tonight, you will yawn. Not because you're tired, not because you're bored. You'll just open your mouth, pull in a long, slow breath, feel your jaw stretch wider than feels comfortable, and then let it go. You'll do it without deciding to. Your body will just do it. But for 99.9% of human history, nobody had any idea why. Not the Greeks, not the Romans, not Darwin, not Freud. For over 400 years, the best scientific explanation for why you yawn was, you needed more oxygen. That was it. That was the theory. And it was completely wrong. The real answer changes everything we think we know about your body, your relationships, and what it means to be conscious. Let's start with what we actually know about the yawn itself. For most of the 20th century, scientists assumed yawning was simple. Boring, even. You get sleepy, CO2 builds up in your blood, your brain sends a signal. You yawn to bring in a rush of oxygen. Clean, logical, done. There was one problem. When researchers actually tested it, the oxygen theory fell apart completely. In 2007, Andrew Gallup, a graduate student at SUNY Albany, ran one of the first properly controlled experiments on yawn triggers. He had participants breathe air with elevated CO2 levels, elevated oxygen levels, and normal air. Then he counted yawns. The CO2 group didn't yawn more. The oxygen group didn't yawn less. The yawn rate was identical across all three conditions. Oxygen had nothing to do with it, so Gallup kept digging. He looked at when yawns actually happen. Not when people are short on oxygen, but when their brain temperature spikes. When you wake up. When you're nervous before something important. When you shift from one mental state to another. And he found something that nobody had looked for. Yawning cools the brain. When you open your jaw wide and inhale, you're drawing cool air across the sinus cavity, right beneath the base of the brain. The stretching of your jaw increases blood flow. The cool air drops the temperature of that blood by a fraction of a degree. And that fraction of a degree matters, because the brain is extraordinarily sensitive to heat. A brain that runs even slightly hot is a brain that runs slow, foggy, imprecise. A yawn isn't a sign that you're shutting down. It's a sign that your brain is trying to sharpen up. Every time you've yawned before a big meeting, before an exam, before a conversation you were dreading, your brain wasn't failing you. It was preparing you. But the brain cooling theory wasn't the whole picture. There was something else happening. Something scientists only started to understand in the early 2000s. And it had nothing to do with temperature at all. Here's the thing about yawning that almost nobody talks about. It's contagious. Not metaphorically. Literally. If you watch someone yawn, you yawn. If you read the word yawn, you yawn. Some of you yawned during the last 30 seconds. That is a real, documented, involuntary neurological response. And for a long time, scientists just kind of shrugged at it. Reflex, mimicry, social cue, whatever. Then Gordon Gallup Jr., Andrew's father, also at SUNY Albany, spent years pulling together yawn research from across disciplines. Anthropology, primatology, developmental psychology. He found references to contagious yawning going back centuries across dozens of cultures, all pointing to the same unexpected pattern. Contagious yawning isn't random. It tracks social bonds. You are significantly more likely to catch a yawn from someone you're close to than from a stranger. Family members catch each other's yawns more than friends. Friends more than acquaintances. Acquaintances more than strangers. The closer the bond, the faster it spreads. And it gets stranger. Children under 4 years old don't catch yawns at all. Neither do people with certain conditions that affect social cognition, including some forms of autism and psychopathy. The ability to catch a yawn appears to be directly linked to empathy, which is when researchers started looking at what's actually happening in the brain when you catch someone's yawn. In 2003, Stephen Platek at Drexel University ran a controlled study using fMRI scans. Participants watched videos of people yawning. He measured what lit up in their brains in the moments before they yawned back. The activated regions were the posterior cingulate cortex and the precuneus, two areas involved in self-referential processing. In simpler terms, the parts of your brain that simulate other minds. The parts that ask, what is it like to be them right now? When you catch a yawn, your brain isn't just mirroring a movement. It's briefly inhabiting another consciousness. It's running a small simulation of what it feels like to be that specific person in that specific moment. It's empathy. Wordless, involuntary, ancient empathy. Your ancestors used contagious yawning to synchronize states across a group. One person's brain needed sharpening, and within seconds, the whole tribe was sharpening together. Alert together. Ready together. It wasn't just a reflex. It was its own distinct social technology. One that most modern humans use dozens of times a day without ever knowing what it actually is. So what broke it? What separated us from the full depth of what a yawn actually does? The answer is simpler than you'd think. Mirrors. Not literal mirrors. Screens. Here's what happened in rapid succession. In 1879, Edison filed the patent for the light bulb. Suddenly, humans could delay sleep indefinitely. Yawning, which had evolved as a state transition signal, a biological cue that your brain was shifting gears, started firing at the wrong times, in the wrong contexts, stripped of its original rhythm. In the 1920s, the Open Plan Office arrived. For the first time, yawning in public became a social liability. You were told to cover your mouth, to suppress it, to be embarrassed by it. By the 1950s, yawning had been rebranded entirely. It meant you were rude, uninterested, checked out. The signal that had once synchronized groups now signaled disrespect. By the early 2000s, the average adult was spending 11 hours a day looking at screens, windows into simulated social worlds, populated by faces that never yawn back. Here's the part nobody talks about. The word yawn itself. In Old English, it was Gainean, which meant to gape open, to open wide, the same root as the word gap. A yawn was literally named after an opening, a space between one state and another, a threshold. We turned a threshold into an embarrassment. A 2019 study published in Sleep Medicine Reviews found that chronic sleep deprivation, now affecting roughly 1 in 3 adults in the developed world, fundamentally disrupts the brain temperature regulation that yawning evolved to support. Your brain overheats more often, recovers more slowly. You yawn more, but the mechanism is impaired. And we have a name for the cognitive fog that results. We call it ADHD. We call it brain fog. We call it burnout. We treat it like a disorder. But what if it's not a disorder at all? What if the fog isn't your brain malfunctioning? What if it's your brain remembering what it was built to do and finding nothing in its environment that helps it do it? 755. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors yawned together around fires. They caught each other's yawns across the dark. They synchronized. They sharpened. They felt, without words, what the person next to them was feeling. They lived in a world where the sky at night wasn't something you drove somewhere to see. It was just the sky. Cold air. No light, but fire. And yawns that spread through a group like a slow wave, one mind reaching toward another. Tonight, you will yawn. And now you know. It isn't boredom. It isn't rudeness. It is your ancient brain, still doing exactly what it was built to do. Reaching across the gap, looking for someone to synchronize with. We covered our mouths, turned off our fires, and stared at screens of faces that never yawn back.